taking care of our class, and also Brother Richard for giving the talk on Jerusalem, on the Romans and their bearing on the destruction of Jerusalem. I listened to all of it and thought everything went well. I was just thinking as Brother Farron was reading from Genesis 26, the sin that Abraham committed was that he did the sin, I just told you what I was about to ask you. The sin that Isaac committed was the same as father had committed earlier, twice, in chapter 12 of Genesis and also in 20. Of what do we speak? Lies, yes. And as he was reading, it also reminded me of another thing I wanted to share briefly. And that is that there's an effort made, has been for some time, by some who use Rahab to try to justify the fact that God somehow overlooks sins. And they use Abraham because James 2 mentions, Abraham's justification by faith. Was not Rahab justified when she, by her works, in that she took the spies and sent them out a different way? And so they'll look at that and say, okay, well, they lied. And so that means God must overlook lying. Doesn't mean that at all. Was Rahab a sinner? Yes. Was Abraham a sinner? Yes. But lying was not overlooked. What was emphasized was their what? Their faith. And oftentimes, a person can have some good attributes that need to be commended and imitated, for that matter. And at the same time, there are other attributes that do not need to be emulated. And so, but there's an effort made. I'm thinking about one preacher in particular who has a lot of influence with young people, and he's used those cases. Well, they've been answered years ago, but people think there's maybe a different kind of a spin on it. Let's look real briefly, and I do mean briefly tonight. I want us to try to cover quite a bit, at least go into Matthew 25 tonight. But in our readings, David took you almost through the end of 2 Chronicles. And so let's just turn there real briefly. Again, we want to remember when we read passages that are parallel sometimes, such as the Kings and Chronicles, the reason is there's God just didn't want to make the Bible longer to get people upset. There's a different emphasis. And so Kings, while tracing the northern and the southern, Chronicles traces really what? The Judah, and primarily the priest and what's going on with them. And so that's and we see in let's just go on 2 Chronicles 34. Josiah is reigning. One thing he did, they took the temple. It had been kind of in disrepair. They repaired it. The book of the law was found, and then Josiah makes a number of what? Reforms. And while he made those reforms, I think David mentioned this Sunday, well said. Jeremiah said that though Josiah did this, who didn't go along? The people did not turn with their whole hearts. And so after Josiah dies, who is king? His son Jehoahaz. And then Jehoahaz is followed by Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim is followed by Jehoiakim, whose name is also Coniah, as well as Jeconiah. And then he is followed by Zedekiah. And then what happens during the reign of Zedekiah, who was a puppet king? Nebuchadnezzar comes and sacks the city. They're taken into Babylonian captivity. If you're looking at 2 Chronicles 36, the last 2 or 3 verses, 22. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, Jehovah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all of his kingdom. Put it also in writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth hath Jehovah, the God of heaven, given me. He charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah, Whosoever there is among you of his people, Jehovah is God, be with him, let him go up. So here's Cyrus allowing the Jews to begin their return. It's interesting that 22 and 23, if you glance down at the next book, Ezra, you've got the same words in the first and second verses of Ezra 1. All right, we're just going to very quickly summarize. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther actually constitute the close of the Old Testament. True or false? You're supposed to say, well, I thought Malachi was. No, is that a true statement? It is, yeah. It's a true statement chronologically. Now, there were 3 prophets who were contemporary with these: Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And sometimes we would call those the post-exilic prophets. You know, you have pre-exilic, pre-captivity prophets, captivity prophets who were Jeremiah, Daniel, and Ezekiel, and then you had the after the captivity prophets. And so you can divide them that way. Ezra, though, deals with the rebuilding of what? They come back and something needs to be the temple. Do they have any kind of opposition?
Yes.
They certainly did. Did they overcome it? Yes. And there's a common denominator with Ezra and Nehemiah toward the end of the book. During the time of the captivity, they had married foreign wives. And they said, well, you know, God wants us to be happy, so we just stay with the wife that we've chosen, right? No. These are passages that when people say, well, I just can't see how in the world God would want me to give up somebody that yes, I've divorced 2 or 3 times before, but I'm so happy now. And God wants me to be happy. We have heard those kinds of arguments. And they said, well, you know, do you know what place in the Bible where God actually demanded that they give up their wives, even by whom they had families? No. Well, it's there. And these are the passages that you can go to in these last passages of chapters of Ezra, as well as Nehemiah, that show that was done. All right, let's go on into the life of Jesus. Any comment or question on Ezra? Oh, by the way, one passage a long time ago, in a different Bible I trying to read through, I thought this is a great incentive, a great prompting. In chapter 7:10, when Ezra comes comes to Jerusalem, and things begin to happen, Ezra set his heart to seek the law of the Lord, to do it, and to teach in Israel statutes and ordinances. That's a 3-point sermon, isn't it? He set his heart to seek the law of the Lord, and then not only find out what it is, but then to do it. And not only find out for himself and do it himself, but then to do what? Teach others as well for their own good. And so there's a great lesson for us in that. All right, let's go ahead. And we're in Matthew 24, in the end of Matthew 24. But what we want to do is just briefly go back. Let me do it this way. Here we go. All right, who wants to tell us these major periods of the life of Jesus? Kirsten, you're the best one to do that. Tell us what they are. Start number 1. Years of preparation. Good. Number 2. All right. 3. Good. Good. Closing ministry. Last week. Good. Real good. Everybody on board? Everybody can do that now. I was talking with a young couple the other night. I had a little study on Google, and we went through the 17 periods and then the books of the Bible, you know, just to make sure everybody's on board, because not everybody is, has all that down. And so this helps us to kind of, if you can think, guys, this way. If you can think as you're studying through things, a brief idea, like a phrase, And let that be like a nail on a wall on which you hang a picture. And that little nail is a phrase. And it represents in your mind a whole lot of ideas that you see in that picture. You follow what I'm saying? And what it does is it keeps your mind in a more of an organized, logical thought process. And instead of just random ideas scattered all the way, you're thinking in an orderly way because you're thinking how the Bible reveals itself. Okay, so we come down to the last week. He goes to Bethany on a Friday and then does what on Saturday? Rest. Saturday night, the anointing at Simon the leper's house. Sunday, day of triumph. Triumph, okay. Monday, day of authority where he cleansed the temple. Well, first of all, he cursed the fig tree, then he cleansed the temple. Tuesday, day of what? Conflict. Let's go through and see if we can name everything that happened on Tuesday. First, the disciples noticed that what happened? The fig tree had withered and died. They come into the city, and the first thing that happens, Jesus is accosted by these fellows who say, by what? Authority do you do these things? Who gave you? He answered that, the baptism of John. And then he kind of had a reprimand for them with three parables that followed. What are they? Parable of the two sons, the wicked husbandman, and then we come to Matthew 22, the parable, what was that? I still can't. The wedding feast. Yeah, parable of the wedding feast. All right. And two of those three, true or false, Jesus actually predicts the destruction of these people as a nation. That's right. That's exactly right. And so the parable of the two sons, he really doesn't. He just shows, who did the will of God. All right. So then we come in the questions, the snares, the entrapment questions that they pose. Pharisees and Herodians come together. Is it lawful to pay taxes? Sadducees, when they see put them to flight, says, okay, we got one he'll never answer. That is the man who has a wife in the resurrection. Whose will she be? All right. So then the Pharisees don't involve themselves, but they send a scribe and say, which is the greatest commandment? He answers that. Then he asks them a question, which is, what think you of the Christ? Whose son is he? All right, and they don't answer that. Then we get something happens immediately after that. What is it? There's a widow. Am I right? The widow's mites. And he notices that. And then after that, we have Matthew 23, where it's really a lambasting of the scribes and the Pharisees because of the H word, their hypocrisy. Right. And did you say Hippocratic oath? It was just the opposite, wasn't it? Their hypocrisy. All right, so he really goes to town on that and shows them that you're just like your fathers, and he gives a lot of examples, and then he closes it out by saying, "Oh Jerusalem, Jerusalem, that stones the prophets, and kills those who were sent. How often would I have done what? Gathered you all together as a hen gathers her chicks, but what? You would not. So I leave to you your house desolate." All right, so then they start down they start out of the temple and they start going down the Kidron, and all of a sudden, what four disciples are there? Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and they say, "Wow, Lord, just look at all the buildings of the temple and all these." And then Jesus said, "I'll tell you, there's not going to be one stone left upon another. Everything's going to be gone." And so then they go on down in the Kidron, they come up on the Mount of Olives, and then they sit down. And they can see over. And so that, "Lord, when will these things be? What will be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" Those three questions. So let's take where I'm not looking at anything. He says the first thing you need to beware of false Christ. Yeah. And so he says these are things that you need to know that you're going to hear that come, and the end is not nigh. And then he says, here are some true signs that you need to understand. And beware. And then he gives in 29 through 31 this figurative use. The sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give its light. And so he's picturing Jerusalem, the whole government is going to be overthrown. And then he says, we've even illustrated by the parable of the, what kind of tree? Fig tree. All right. And when it brings out its leaves, you know these things, so you can know these things. And I'll tell you of a certainty, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Then the transition. But of that day and hour knoweth no one. All right, so let's turn to Matthew 24. And you're already there, aren't you? I've got to turn to it myself. Matthew 24 in verse 36. Of that day and hour knoweth no one, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. And so you can know all these other signs, but you can't win. All right, who does he illustrate? Things will be going on just kind of as usual, just as it was during the days of Noah. And they'll know not until, they didn't know until they entered into the ark. Knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall be the coming of the Son of Man, verse 39. And then he uses men and women. Here's two men in the field. One's taken, one is left. Two women grinding at the mill. One's taken, one's left. There'll be a separation made in judgment. So the point is, watch, for you know not on what day your Lord comes. But know this, if the master of the house had known what watch the thief was coming, he would have watched and would not have suffered or allowed his house to be broken through. So you be ye also ready, for an hour that you think not the Son of Man comes. Let's read 45 through 51, because he makes a point that, during this time, there's going to be a tarrying, a waiting. And so you need to be faithful in what you do. Brother Charlie, if you would, 45 through 51.
Who then is the faithful and sensible slave who his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave that his master find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if the evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards, and the master of the slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour which he does not know. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, and in the places there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
All right, let's answer our questions on page 82. Y'all had gotten down to that on Sunday morning. In the note on top, page 82, I mentioned up to this time Jesus has discussed signs, and you see the underlining of the plurality of in days that warned the disciples of Jerusalem's impending destruction. They could know when it would occur. Concerning his second coming, there are no signs, and it will be the day, and no one knows when it will occur except the Father. And 36, the word but seems to be the transition from the destruction of Jerusalem to the Lord's second coming. All right, number 1A, the uncertainty. 36 through 39 illustrate what it would be like when Christ returns. What's the difference between this, the Lord's coming, and what we have earlier studied concerning the destruction of Jerusalem? Note especially 33 and 39. All right, 33 and 39, they could what? They could know, right, that Jerusalem's destruction was nigh. But on the other, they could not know. B, generally speaking, describe what people are doing in 40 and 41. What was that, David?
Their daily routines.
Daily routines, yeah. They're married, giving in marriage. In other words, they're planning for the future. Things are going on just as usual. We're submitting to obligations that we'll have in the future, not considering. James 4:17 warns us about that we not that we should never make plans, but we ought to make plans if the Lord we will go into town and buy and sell and get gain and so on. I mentioned in the note under B, earlier Jesus pictured pictured common occurrences both men and women engage in, and taught that when they saw the signs he gave, leave immediately, flee into the mountains. Here, Jesus again pictures men and women at work, but there's a difference. No signs are given. One is taken, another is left. So you see a complete different description of times. All right, but preparation is necessary. 42, he says, watch therefore. 44, therefore be ye also ready. What should we do since we do not know when the Lord will come in judgment? Right, always be prepared. And we'll see that illustrated in what parable? In Matthew 25. I talked about it. What was that? Parable of the virgins, exactly. And so he's going to kind of elongate that answer by illustrating it with the parable of the virgins. How is our continued need to be watchful or prepared for the Lord's judgment? Illustrated in verse 43. What comes into the house? A thief. If you knew when, you wouldn't need Brinks or, any of these other security devices on your house. What is again emphasized in verse 44? Be what?
Ready.
Be ready. Yeah. What does verse 44 prevent us from doing? It prevents us from what now?
Doing nothing.
Doing nothing. Yeah, being complacent. And even predicting what? When he's coming. Yeah. Guys, we've got to know that when you get somebody say, well, we know the end is coming because, and then they use these terms like end times. We know the end times are here, and then they're knowing, they claim to know things that the Lord says you can't know. And that's just not right.
Also, Philip, at that time, we've already got to be prepared.
Yeah.
At that time, when he comes back, there will be no prep time.
No.
There- That's too late.
No time to go in the house and get things. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times the time will come for us, or I say will come. It does come oftentimes for people that it would be just as, from a practical point of view, it's just as ending or final as if the Lord did come, and that is when something happens to us suddenly. What is that? Death. And don't you believe that death can happen to us suddenly? Yes. I think the majority of people think, I guess I'll probably live to 95, 97, maybe I'll make it to 100. Medication is better, drugs, and they never think, can a stroke take you out? Can a heart attack? Can an accident? Can somebody who's texting on their phone swerve over? I see that when I'm out all the time. People just see, or they'll slow down. You say, why in the world are they slow down? They'll speed up, and they're not paying attention. I used to think one of the safest drives that I enjoy driving when we go out to Donaldson on Warrior River Road, and just those long curves, just really out in the country, and I just enjoyed that. And I thought, somebody is texting, and all of a sudden they're not hanging the curve, they're hanging right toward me, and there's not anything you can do about it. And that's what happened to Brother Moore. Well, it wasn't texting, but Brother Moore was killed. The drunk driver just went in fact, Brother Moore, I actually went off the side of the road, on the side of the road, his side, and she hit him head on his side of the road. And right after he'd gotten through with the gospel meeting down in Vernon, on the way back on a Friday night. I mean, I'm telling you, anything can happen to any of us at any time. And there was a girl who was over at Hoover High School. She was a sophomore. And all of a sudden, she just kind of felt sick. This was last spring. She just kind of got feeling sick. And all of a sudden, by midnight, her temperature was high. And they took her to the hospital. By about 4 o'clock in the morning, she was gone. And they never could figure out exactly, some kind of, I don't know if it's meningitis or what. Things do happen. And we just need to be ready. Remember in Luke, we studied this earlier. In Luke's account, the fields of a man brought forth plentifully. And he says, you know, I don't have enough barns. I need to tear down my old barns and build new barns, and wherein to bestow my goods. And the Lord said, you foolish one, this night is thy soul required of thee. And that was in the context of Luke 12 with the covetousness. The fellow who came up to Jesus, divide this inheritance between me and my brother. And Jesus just gave that parable, that teaching, to show, you better be prepared. All right. So we answered C, didn't we? E, Jesus changes the illustration from a householder watching for a thief to that of a servant waiting for his master. What is the reward given to a wise and faithful servant? He will set him over what? All his house, yes. And that's a kind of an idea that is repeated in other teachings of the Lord, that if we're faithful over whatever he's given us in this life, he'll make us a ruler over many things. Yeah, that if we are good with what we're given here, and they'll trust us true riches in the hereafter. All right, F. On the other hand, what will happen to the servant who presumes on the Lord's delay in coming and is unprepared? There'll be what? Yes, punishment, right. What's the portion that will be appointed to the unprepared? He'll have...
He's put in the same place the unfaithful went to hell.
Exactly, yeah, the hypocrites and all the other. Some believe the faithful and wise servant whom his Lord has set over his household may refer primarily to people such as the apostles who occupied positions of authority in the church. Obviously, the application would extend to all Christians, but it does seem like, since he was speaking to the apostles, and they had the position basically of stewards, they were under the Lord, but then they were over in their execution, or at least their deliverance of divine revelation. All right, and then the overall significance in summary, we remember God's judgment against Jerusalem was because of their sins, especially the rejection of Christ. It was a type of final judgment. Unfolding history showing the fulfillment of Jesus' words concerning Jerusalem promises the certainty of final judgment. Basically, if he said this is what's going to happen, then you can count on something else that he says will happen. It's interesting that some facts in the Bible present the foundation for other things that have to be accepted by faith. Case in point, this. Another case in point, Acts 17, 30 and 31. When Paul wound down his speech on Mars Hill, he said that God has appointed a day in which he will do what? Judge the world in righteousness by the men whom he hath ordained. Here's the kicker. Inasmuch as he hath given assurance unto all men in that he raised Jesus from the dead. So the resurrection of Jesus is the fact, it's the foundation on which he can promise that there's going to be a judgment in the future. And so you have foundational facts that give us the confidence to have faith in something that is yet in the future for us. Does that make sense? So there's a grounding of our faith. It's not just some pie in the sky, or we just hope that things will turn out and there's nothing to base it on. Yes, the basis is solid foundation. All right, let's go on. We got a few minutes here. We're working out okay. Let me come on down. Here is where we were. And we've already gone through all of this. Here's a picture, or rather a slide, that you have on page 83. And what I tried to do on this is chart the two different judgments. And you can just see when you make a contrast like this, in the destruction of Jerusalem, there would be a benefit by fleeing. No such benefit. You couldn't flee. This was local. This will be universal. This required haste in escaping. Haste will accomplish nothing in that one. This would be while the Sabbath was still binding, and you said pray that it not be. that would impede your exit from the city, this will be long after the Sabbath would end. The elect involved in this would be helped by the shortening of days, and the shortening of days would help nobody. And then in this, it could be claimed by false teachers that Christ was in the wilderness or in the inner chamber, he's somewhere. In this, his whereabouts will be known to all persons. It will be universal. This will be preceded by tribulation. And the last time, there is no scripture reference to tribulation. Related to this were definite signs, no signs. This was known to the Lord, this is not known. By listening to the Lord, men can know when this would be. By listening to the Lord, men cannot know when this will be. This will be following the gospel would be preached in the whole world. That's in that first paragraph of Matthew 24. Following this, there will be no gospel preaching. There won't be any need for it. The time of this was definite. It's not definite on this. Things would not be normal. There would be wars, famines, earthquakes in diverse places. And yet over here, things will be, there will be marriage, giving in marriage, just like with Noah. Some would have time to escape. No one will have time to escape. This was illustrated by the parable of the fig tree. It's illustrated by the parable of the thief. With regard to the Lord, emphasize that it would be within the lifetime of that generation. And with regard to this, emphasis is upon a long delay, that my Lord tarrieth, or while the bridegroom tarried, Matthew 25, after a long time. And I think we're living in that now. This is definitely a local judgment upon one action, and this is universal, involving all nations. In fact, he mentions that in the judgment scene in Matthew 25. This takes place on earth. This takes place in heaven. This is referred to by those days. This is referred to by that day. To me, it nails it shut. I know there are a lot of brethren who think that whole chapters dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem. I do not see that. I just can't see it. I think Mark and Luke accounts do deal primarily with the Jerusalem destruction, because only two parts of that question were accounted for in Mark and Luke, where you have three parts, and your coming. Okay, comment or question? Anybody? Okay, lessons learned. We went over this actually Sunday night. Okay, now where we are in Matthew 25, just think. I think oftentimes when I was growing up, I didn't think of this. I didn't think, okay, Matthew 25, Jesus is still the chief speaker, and the speech is a continuation of the thoughts of Matthew 24, especially the end of the chapter. And so you have the continued teaching relative to Jesus' second coming from three viewpoints. There are two parables, and then the judgment scene. Three parts. Some say three parables. I like to say two, because it looks like the judgment scene is real there, 31 through 46. So the parable of the virgins, the talents, and the view of judgment. And then we talked about this with the 10 virgins. Let's just read through it quickly, because I don't want to, everybody was here Sunday night, were they? Those of you who are here tonight. Then shall the kingdom of heaven, whenever Jesus says that, he's talking about what? People who are what? Not in the world. Saved. They're in the church, yes. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps, went forth to meet the bridegroom, and 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For the foolish, when they took their lamps, they took no oil with them. The wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, there's your same word that's used back in 24. They all slumbered, they nodded and slept. But at midnight there's a cry, behold, the bridegroom, come forth to meet him. Then all those virgins arose, trimmed their lamps. Foolish said unto the wise, give us of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, peradventure there will not be enough for us and you. Go you rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. In other words, do something on your own. And while they went away to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he said, verily I say unto you, I know you not. Watch therefore, for you know not the day nor the hour. that is reminiscent of back in verse 42 and verse 44, almost same language. And so you see the illustration of the parable is illustrating the teaching of 24. And so the chief point is always be ready, always be ready. And then we tried to point out Sunday night several things about this. We're talking about church members, those who've been saved. And because they were virgins, likely, possibly, we don't know this, but possibly Jesus had in mind purity of members, as 2 Corinthians 11. The groom is Christ, and the coming of the bridegroom is his second coming. It could mean when he actually comes in, or from a practical point of view, our own death. The tarrying of the groom would be, after he ascended into heaven and before he returns, which is from, Acts 1 until he returns. Our time now. The shutting of the door, all opportunities are over, and possibly the oil would be the preparation made, would represent his preparation. The difference is we went through that Sunday night. They weren't incompetent. They weren't unconverted. They were waiting, but they didn't take any extra oil. It was an insufficient amount. They made what they thought was sufficient, but ran the risk of thinking the groom would come earlier when they had sufficient oil. They thought he might come before. In other words, they thought they knew when he would come. Everyone who delays obeying the gospel, they have to mentally think. That's a redundancy, isn't it? They have to be thinking, the Lord is just not going to come before I obey the God. I think I've got time to do it. Is that not an unspoken thought? Isn't that right? If somebody knows, I know I need to, I'm banking on the fact that I'm going to have what? Time. So in essence, they're saying, I just don't really believe he's coming right now, or else I will do something about it. So they're banking on that. The wise are wise in the fact that they took extra oil. They were prepared. They thought, hey, he could come at a time after our first part of our oil runs out. So we're going to prepare and make sure we're ready at any time he comes. They made their calling and their election sure. It's impossible to make too much preparation. And so the overall lessons we went over Sunday night, the five foolish represent those who are indifferent enough to be content with the knowledge that they run some risk of being lost. I don't think people think about it that way. Do y'all? Y'all are awfully quiet. Don't y'all think that's right? Yes, sir, Farron.
I do. The five that didn't have enough oil were members of the church
Yeah.
in that parable.
Yeah, that's
Because they
true.
had obeyed the gospel.
Yeah,
But then they sat back on their hunches and didn't do enough after that.
Exactly. I kind of extended it out, but you're right. It is talking about people who are in the kingdom. You're right, yeah.
You think about that, people put a lot of effort and money and time into buying insurance. In
Yeah.
case something happens.
In case oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
then they let it so long, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
They're-
Something could happen to me, so I want the wife and kids taken care of. Yeah, exactly. They count on the Lord returning when they happen to be ready. Not that he might tarry. They're not always ready. Five wise are those who think ahead, and if they err on the side of safety. No one can help us in judgment. I think that's another point there. And one day the Lord will come, all opportunities to be prepared will be gone. Okay. All right. Comment or question on any of that? I didn't want to belabor it since we preached on it.
Think the Lord is still the only one that knows when he's coming back?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You think the Father's still the only one that knows when he's
Yeah, that's a question. Good question. Some think that the Lord did not, when he said that statement, that he didn't know while he was on earth. And that since he's ascended into heaven, that he does know. I don't know. I just don't know. Okay. we've got about 7 till, it's probably the best time to stop. The parable, let me just overview it real brief. The parable, a talent is a what? It's a standard of what? A weight, yeah, roughly 70 pounds, usually money. And so here, 5, 2, and 1 talent, and the servants were expected to do something with the amounts of the talents they had been given. They were to do something with it. And when the master went off and then came back, he made a reckoning with them. What had you done with the 5 talent man gained 5 more. 2 talent, 2 more. The 1 talent was not because he just had 1, it was because he didn't do what?
He didn't do anything.
He didn't do anything. And so the point on all of this, I'll just maybe here, I think this point that I tried to highlight in red is that the comparison of the virgins to the talents may be this. The virgins parable teaches the need to be prepared always. Don't give the least amount. The talents parable teaches how to be prepared. We use the opportunities, the circumstances, and abilities we have. We use the resources and always do that. Then we will be prepared. Yes, sir.
The reason I thought that was talking about money in that particular parable was he told the guy with 1, you could have at least put it in the bank.
In the bank, yes. And we've gotten some usury or interest. Good point.
But the thing, it didn't cost them anything to get the money. It cost the landowner to give them that money.
Yeah, they were given these things. And there's a tremendous lesson, how much we're given. Usually we use the word talents to mean, abilities with, like we usually use the word. Somebody may have athletic talent or intellectual talent or maybe musical talent or mechanical talent, something that is maybe an exceptional gift. And that can be certainly an application of it, but the talent was usually understood as a sum of money, about 70 pounds. I read one time anywhere from 66 to 75 pounds was considered a talent in weight. And so usually just kind of make it around 70.
If that kind of talent was ability, mine would be less than with us 2 nights.
Oh, that's bad. That is bad. You got more than you think, Brother Fair. All of us do, don't we?